this is where your purpose, your true purpose, starts to come online. You can imagine if most people's motivation is the material, and then they achieve the material, if they have not awakened beyond the ego, anything after that kind of feels like death, kind of feels like, what's the point, right? So think about it like this. You have, this is like the realm of survival. And this is the realm of light, purpose, and soul. Okay. You guys love my handwriting. Survival, light, purpose, and soul. Okay. So we have like this whole world where the majority of the world is existing, right? Majority of people are in survival. In survival, the motivation, the main motivation is money, right? There's nothing wrong with this, by the way. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just not the end all be all. So say somebody is here and their motivation is money, right? And so say here is like the most money they've ever made, to the point where they're like, I've done it, right? And they get to this point, but they thought that this would make them feel a certain way. They thought it would make them feel, I've done it, enlightened, everything's beautiful, right? And there might be like a moment of that. But then they go, oh, well, shit, now what? Right? Now what? So someone who hits this moment, who has not been exposed to or available for what's more after that, because what's happening here is that the ego has done its thing, right? You have achieved what the ego told you that you should achieve. And after that, awakening begins. Because after you have the money and money is no longer a motivator, if you're still in the ego, what the ego will do is sabotage you back down. And then you'll have to do it again. You see that? But if we get to this point and we say, okay, there's more, there's something more, this is where your purpose, your true purpose, starts to come online. This is where it's like, okay, I've achieved everything that's material, right? There's no more material that I can get that's going to make me feel some sort of way. But by the way, we see this, right? We see celebrities with 8 million cars, people with so much money, they don't know what to do with it. So they're buying the next thing, buying the next thing, buying the next thing, looking for that feeling, trying to fulfill that sensation. Or they take a south route where they end up traumatizing the human body through drugs and over excessive use of alcohol and all of that, right? Because they're wanting to feel something. And when the ego hits this point and it doesn't have something else for you to go after to give your life meaning, then it starts to go through that death process, right? And it doesn't know how to function beyond that. This is because we have to awaken the soul side, polarity, right? We've got to get on the other side. There's something more. There's something bigger. There's light pouring in like never before. And so at this point is where you actually get to know your true self. That's where you actually get to know your true self. Now, can you get to know your true self before you achieve all of the material? 100%. 100%. And I would even say like you're ahead of the game. Because your true self is going to lead you on a path of what I call total fulfillment or salvation. I'm going to have to get better handwriting if I'm going to be doing this a lot more. Total fulfillment or salvation. Salvation to me, I read this in A Course in Miracles one time. Salvation to me is the path that hits on all levels. In the Lightworker Society, we call this God's path. God's path versus your fear path. Fear path, survival path is like, it's all about me. It's selfish. It's like, I've got to get this to make sure I'm okay. God's path is one of service and putting out into the world It's your dharma. It's what you came here to do. And it will hit on all cylinders. It will take care of you and more, right? But our ego says, I got to get mine first. I got to get mine first, right? So if we're aware of what we feel like we're here on this earth to do, we can feel that bigger purpose that's beyond the achievement, check the boxes, beyond the material, then we're doing well, right? And I would even say that like that's happening more than it ever has before. You feel me? I mean, it's still not the majority of the world. The majority of the world is still trying to feel valid through our things, but it's happening more, right? Like we see consciousness awakening. We see people wanting to do something for the world, give in a bigger way, right? Which is really, really cool. But the main point of this is that once you get to this part, that's where you actually find yourself. That's where you discover like the true you. Have you ever thought about that? Like, what is my motivation? Why would I do what I do if there's no material goal? Do you know what I mean? And this is where those cliche questions come in. Like, if you had all the money in the world, if you had all the money and all the time, then what would you do? And it's a valid question. Like, if you can answer that, you are finding your true path. If it was not about making money, and it was not about like gaining in some way, what would you do? Those are the questions that really start to like get into the mind, because the mind is all about survival, right? The mind and the ego and that part of ourselves, that reptilian brain, is all about survival. And so it's constantly on this hustle wheel for things to survive, to live a better physical life, which is fine, except it's only like this teeny tiny little portion of who you are. And so if I can ask the question, if I had all the money in the world, if it was never about money and it was never about running out of time, what would I do every day? What would be my motivation? And you can feel it, right? You feel that pull. It's so strong. Even if you don't have it totally identified as to what it is, it's like a deep reverberation. You know what I mean? Like how an earthquake begins at the core of the earth and then it shakes everything outside of it. It's like a deep reverberation, a deep, like solid strength when you start to ask that question, what would I do? What would I do? Right? So we're deep, aren't we?